Hey everybody, I'm Kevin and this is Kemp Outside. We're your inside source for all things outside. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button and follow along with us. This is a series called Learn to Fish, and it's all about helping people who've never gone fishing before or have very limited fishing experience learn how to fish. We're starting with the very basics. Things like I don't know what kind of fishing pole I should have, or I don't know how to tie a knot. I don't know how to tie a hook or a lure on the line. I don't know how to spool a rod on a reel or line on a reel. I'm sorry. I don't know how to bait a hook or what hook to use or what lures to use, all that stuff. When to use a bobber. All of these things we're going to cover in this Learn to Fish series. And we're going to cover lots of different fishing disciplines, from fishing in rivers and streams to fishing in lakes, freshwater fishing, and then we're also going to talk about some saltwater fishing. So how to fish from a beach or a pier, how to fish saltwater in a boat, like in a bay or an estuary or things like that. And then so we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different fishing stuff to try and cover all the different places that you may be out fishing. This series is for that single mom who has a son or daughter who wants to go fishing. This is for the dads out there who maybe didn't have a dad of their own and took them camping, fishing, whatever, but they want to do that with their family. This is for all you parents out there who want to help their kids develop a love for nature and the outside. There's no question too dumb. So you can always email me at info@kempoutside.com. If you don't want to put your question in the comments, there's no question too dumb, guys. If you have any questions, I want to help you go fishing and have great experiences with your kids. If you try it and it's frustrating and the kids are unhappy, then it's just going to be a failure. So I'm all about making sure that your fishing adventures, especially when you're starting out, are a success. So please follow along, hit that subscribe button, and we'll get started. This video today is in our Learn to Fish series on the different types of fishing rods. So here we go. Okay, so on this episode of Kemp Outside, we're going to talk about the different types of fishing rods and help you select the fishing rod that's right for you, especially to start. So let's talk about sizes of fishing rods first. So just like mechanics have different tools for different jobs, I wouldn't use the same fishing rod for fishing for blue marlin in the Atlantic Ocean as I would fishing for trout in a stream in Montana. There are rods in all different sizes and different functions and made for different types of fishing. But just like tools, where some tools are very highly specialized and others are more general, a lot of fishing rods can be used for multiple uses. And so for me here near the Tampa Bay area, the fishing rods I use for bass, a lot of my bass fishing, a lot of freshwater fishing, even walleye fishing up north, and smallmouth bass fishing, pike, catching pike in Minnesota. I use those same rods down here in Florida to fish for snook and redfish and sea trout, flounder, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to focus on today is showing you the different sizes of rods that you might consider, and then kind of tell you where I think maybe you ought to land depending on what kind of fishing you're going to do. So another thing to consider is what the rod is made out of. So fishing rods are typically made out of either fiberglass. That's the old way of making fishing rods, but there are still some fiberglass rods out there. Fiberglass is very strong. It's also pretty forgiving, which means it's really bendy and rods don't tend to break. And then there are also rods that are made out of graphite, and graphite is much lighter than fiberglass. It's more sensitive, so you feel the strikes of the fish easier. A lot of your high-end fishermen, your competition fishermen, that kind of thing, and then people who take fishing very seriously, they buy graphite rods of varying prices and quality. And then there are companies out there who make composite rods that are composite mix of fiberglass and graphite, and that helps you with strength and maybe some flexibility, some forgiveness, but also it lightens the weight and makes the rod more sensitive. So it really all depends on what you want. Typically fiberglass is less expensive and graphite is more expensive. But even that is changing. Things are changing all the time. So the rod series that I'm going to use today are the Berkley Cherrywood rods. And I like this rod a lot. I fish with these. I started fishing out with these when I was a kid. You can see it's a red color, but it's made by a company called Berkley. And I'm not sponsored by anybody, guys. I'm just talking about things that I like. So, Berkley, there's the red logo. Sorry, it's upside. Oh, nope, it's not upside down. Good. Berkley makes fishing rods. These Cherrywood series rods are about $25 a fishing rod, so they're very affordable to get started. I fish them in freshwater and saltwater. If you take care of them, they'll take care of you. My kids fish with a lot of Berkley Cherrywood rods. Now, I'll be honest, I fish with rods that are a lot more expensive when it's just me. But when I take guests on the boat or beginners, I find that these Berkley Cherrywood rods are very forgiving and work great for them. So I really like the Berkley Cherrywood series. I highly recommend it for a beginner or an angler on a budget. You can spend $150 on a rod or higher. A lot of the guys I know who fish saltwater fish, $250 fishing rods with that's just the rod, not the reel. Fishing can get very expensive, but if you're on a budget or you're just starting out or you're not sure how much you're going to fish, a $25 Berkley Cherrywood rod and then getting a decent reel is a great way to go. So the first rod I have in my hand right now, so this is an ultralight fishing rod. And so Berkley Cherrywood has an ultralight series. They're 5 feet long. They're a single piece. And the line rating on this rod is like 1 to 4 pounds. So this is for really, really small fish or catching fish where you want a real challenge. I use ultralights for when I'm fishing for trout. So if you're going anywhere where they have a trout stream and you don't want to learn to fly fish, because fly fishing is a whole nother level of skill. I'm not saying don't learn to fly fish. So that's but it does take some time, and fly fishing equipment is quite expensive. So if you're going somewhere where there's like a nice little trout stream, getting a little ultralight rod like this, and fishing for rainbow trout or brook trout or brown trout, whatever they've stocked in the streams, that's an awful lot of fun. Another fun use of ultralight rods is for panfish like bluegill and sunfish, brim. It's called different things in all different parts of the country. So whatever bluegill, sunfish, brim. I'm trying to think of some of the other names. Panfish, that whatever people call them, red breast, shell crackers. There's a whole bunch of names, and it's a whole family of fish. There's not just one. I also do a lot of perch fishing on ultralight rods, catching yellow perch up in the Midwest. I love to fish with ultralights because you feel every bite, and it's very sensitive. But if you're kind of new at playing fish, you might want a little bit heavier duty rod with a little bit stronger of a fishing line. So with the ultralight rod, just to go over it real quick, like I said, it's a one-piece rod. So I guess we should talk about that. So rods are made in 1-piece and 2-piece rods. Also, there are travel rods that break down into 3 or even 4 pieces. And then if you're talking about fly rods, they have multiple pieces as well. But typically with conventional fishing gear, there are 1-piece and 2-piece rods. The advantage of a 2-piece rod is that it's easily broken down for travel. So when I'm driving to places far away, like I fished all over. I mean, in the last couple of years, I've fished Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota. That might be it. And then obviously Florida. So when I'm getting around, if I don't have the space to take my 1-piece rods, taking 2-piece rods is very handy. You just break them apart. I use zip ties to zip them together, to hold them together. And then I use like a shipping tube from from like FedEx or something like that, or if you order rods from Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's, they always come in a shipping tube, and I'll use those to transport my rods when I need to. I take the reels off and transport the rods separate. But if you're moving around a lot, a 2-piece rod is very nice for being able to travel. 1-piece rods are typically what your professional anglers will use and your serious anglers will use, and the reason is because you lose some sensitivity with a 2-piece rod, and so these folks that are fishing competitively or just take fishing very seriously, they want to be able to feel everything, and so they buy high-dollar rods that are 1-piece rods. I have both in my arsenal. I fish 1-piece rods as often as I can, but like I said, if I'm going to get on a plane and fly to Minnesota, or I'm going to drive where I'm not taking my boat and I have limited space in the Kemp bus in my van, I take 2-piece rods. So that's something for you to consider. If you're only fishing around you and you have space, or you have a pickup and you can throw your rod in the back or whatever, I highly recommend 1-piece rods, but also 2-piece are fine too. So whatever you need there. So going back to the ultralight, so on the ultralight, I use, and these are all spinning rods, by the way. This is called a spinning rod, and so this is a spinning reel, right? And it's got the bail, and that's how you open and release the line. And we're going to show you how to cast and all that stuff in a future video. But on an ultralight, I use a 500 size reel. So reels have different sizes, and each brand uses a different kind of a different system, but they're all pretty similar. So what you'll see on reels is that'll have a number, and I don't know if you can. Let me see if I can get this in the frame. But the number right there, right? So that says. Should say 500. Yep, 500 FA. It's a Sedona 500 FA, this model. So this is a Shimano reel. I like Shimano reels. I use a lot of Shimano reels, so I highly recommend those. But Daiwa, Penn, Pfluger, there's a lot of good reel companies out there. Abu Garcia. But for an ultralight, I like a small reel because you want the rod to balance itself really well. You want it to be nice and light. So I go with a 500 size reel on an ultralight. So to recap, if you're catching panfish, if you're going trout fishing, if you're fishing in small streams, an ultralight rod is a great way to go. I think that for most people though, who may be fishing for more than just little panfish and trout, like if you want to do any kind of bass fishing or that kind of thing, you're going to need a heavier duty rod. So the next rod we're going to talk about is a light action rod. Okay, so the next rod I have in my hand is a light action rod. I think you can tell that it's a little bit bigger. And I'm going to take these outside and I'm going to line them up so that you can see them all in a line, so you can actually get a really sense of the difference in sizes. We are facing a major thunderstorm coming through the area right now, so I've got to do this video inside. But the light action rod is a little bit larger. Again, this is a Berkley Cherrywood series. And so for a light spinning rod, the line weight is 2 to 6 pounds is the line weight they recommend. Berkley's light action rods are 5 foot 6 inches long, so it's 6 inches longer than the ultralight, but it's also a little thicker. For this one, I use a 2000 size reel, so it's a lot bigger than the 500. But it isn't as big as some of the other reels that I'm going to show you. I like between 1,000 and 2,000 size reel for light action rods. Honestly, I would prefer to probably put 1,000 series on this rod, but I have more 2,000 series reels than 1,000 series, so that's kind of how it works out. This is just basically this one is a 2-piece rod. So I'll show you how it breaks apart. You just pull it apart right like that, and then it slides right back in. You want to make sure it's seated down nicely. Now, when you're doing a lot of casting with these things, occasionally they can start to slide out, especially if you're slinging them pretty hard. So after 10 casts or so, you might want to just check and make sure it's snug in there. It's pretty funny the other day. I was fishing with my son Delaney. He's 11, and he went to cast, and he was really trying to sling his lure out there, and he looks down and he's only got a half of a fishing rod in his hand, and he had to reel in the rest of the rod because it was in the water. So he's like, "What the heck?" And I'm like, "No, it's okay." And so we had to show him how to make sure that his rod stays together. So, but like I said, this is a light action rod. And so light action rods are used for a lot of the same things that I use an ultralight for. And so if you're just a beginner and you want to do a lot of pan fishing, a lot of crappie, lake perch, trout, some of your smaller fish, bluegill, brim, that kind of thing, a light action rod is great. I rig these up with little hooks and a split shot. And I use bread balls when I'm up in Minnesota, and we fish off the dock for bluegill all day long and just have a blast. And we do that with the kids. So light action rods are great for your smaller fish. If you're just starting out, I recommend a light action rod instead of an ultralight because it's a little more forgiving. You can have a little bit more line, a little bit stronger, stronger line, like 6-pound test line instead of 4 or 2, and you can, and like I said, this one is a 2-piece rod. So the ultralights are only 1 piece because they're only 5 feet long. So if you want a 2-piece rod, you got to go to a light action. The next rod we're going to talk about is a medium. Okay, so this is our Berkley Cherrywood in a medium. So the medium is even thicker than the light action rod. This one is a 2-piece rod. But I think you can buy the Cherrywoods in both 2-piece and 1-piece. I'm pretty sure you can. I buy my Cherrywoods in 2-piece rods because I take these traveling. For my 1-piece rods, they're kind of higher end rods. I fish a number of different rods, and I'm going to do some rod reviews here so you can check out some of the different stuff I fish with. But I'd like to buy my Berkleys in 2-piece rods because they're great for travel. But again, this is a medium, and so the medium, this one is the line rating is 4 to 12-pound test. So obviously, we're talking bigger fish, and this one is a 7-foot rod. So this is where sizing comes in. You can get medium rods in a lot of different rod lengths, everything from just under 6 feet. All the way to, I've seen like 7.5 footers. So rod length, rod length is good when you need to make long casts. So here in Tampa Bay, when you're out fishing, a lot of the fish are they're used to the fishing pressure. There's a lot of fishing pressure in Tampa Bay. And so a lot of the fishing guides say that if you can't make a long cast, you won't catch fish because those fish see you coming. And so a lot of anglers in Tampa Bay are now fishing with 7.5-foot rods to make sure that they're maximizing their cast lengths. I fish with a lot of 7-foot rods. I like that. But if you have a young kid or you're not comfortable with a rod that long, I started off, I think my 15-year-old son, I started him off with a 6.5-foot rod for his medium, and also 6-foot rods are available. If you're fishing around structure, so like if you're fishing from the bank of a lake and there's a lot of like vegetation around, or you're fishing in a stream or a river for like smallmouth bass or that kind of thing, and you don't need really long cast distances, then by all means don't buy a 7 or 7.5-foot rod. I would go with a 6.5 or even a 6-footer. I have rods of all different lengths depending on what I'm doing and what kind of bait I'm throwing and where I'm fishing. If I've got to fish structure like up under tree limbs and things like that to try and catch fish that are structure-oriented fish, so a lot of fish, they want structure in the water, whatever it is, like a root ball or a branch or something, they'll hang out there. And so if you're trying to cast to something and you don't need distance and you want accuracy, I like a shorter rod. So like I said, I fish with all different kinds of things, but for you, depending on what you're doing, you may want to start off with a 6 or 6.5-foot rod, and then if you need that casting distance, maybe jump up to a 7 or 7.5 foot. Like I said, this one's a 7 foot. It's a great rod. We use this a lot. A lot of guests on my boat use this rod. It's caught a lot of fish. This is great for bass fishing. So smallmouth and largemouth bass, or spotted bass, depending on where you are in the country. It's also, okay for saltwater use. If you want to use it to catch snook, redfish, sea trout, flounder, even mangrove snapper, sheep's head, a lot of different, Florida sheep's head, by the way, not California sheep's head. That's totally different. Actually, in California, they call them sheep head. In Florida, sheep's head, which is a striped fish. It's delicious to eat. And then up in the Midwest, sheep's head are freshwater drum. So I got to be careful when I use common names. But anyway, walleye, I've used these rods for walleye. I use these rods for pike. I use these rods for a lot of things. So I guess what I would recommend to you, if I had to recommend one fishing rod to you, unless all of you're doing is saltwater fishing, or unless all you're doing is largemouth bass fishing, I would recommend a medium action rod. I've caught everything from crappie to rainbow trout to snook, redfish, largemouth bass, sea trout, walleye, pike, yellow perch, bluegill. I've caught everything on a medium action rod. So I highly recommend medium action rods to start. So yeah, so that is the medium action rod. The next rod we're going to show you is the medium heavy. So I forgot to mention on the medium action rod, reel size. So for reels, I use a 2500 series reel or a 3000 series reel for medium action rods. That gives me the maximum amount of line capacity, and it's a little bit bigger. So it feels right, the rod feels more balanced. And then also, we need, when I do a video on reels, I'm going to talk about something called drag, which is how much the line will come out when a fish starts to run. You don't want everything totally locked down because it could snap the line. So you can adjust the drag on these reels, which basically is how much tension you're putting on a fish when it's trying to run away from you, and how much line will it pull off the reel. So we're going to talk about drag a little later, but I just wanted to add that in here. So this rod is a medium heavy rod. And I don't know if you can tell on the video, like I said, I'm going to line these things up outside so that you can see them. But a medium heavy rod is even bigger than the medium, of course. It's thicker. So the medium heavy, this one is a 7-foot rod, just like the medium, but it takes 8 to 17 pound test line as their recommended line. Now you can put heavier line on, you can put lighter line on. You don't have to follow the line guidelines. I typically do though, unless I'm doing some specific things. So like bass fishermen on some of their bait casters, which is a different type of rod and reel that we'll talk about in a little bit, but they will load their reel up with like 65 pound test line. And it's not because they're catching 65 pound bass, because they're not. You know, a 10 pound bass is an amazing fish. But what they're doing is they're fishing into heavy, what they call heavy cover, which is like weeds and vegetation and stuff like that. And they need to rip that lure through that heavy vegetation because bass like to get up under that heavy vegetation. And so there are different fishing techniques for bass where they're fishing that heavy cover, and they need a really strong line, because if they fish with a light line and they get hung up, when they go to pull their lure out, they're just going to break the line and lose their lure. So they fish with like 65 pound test line, which is just crazy to me. But I'm not a hardcore bass fisherman. I like to bass fish, but I'm not hardcore about it. So I don't do some of that stuff that they do. Although it's not like I wouldn't try it if somebody handed me a rod and said, let's go. But anyway, so medium heavy rods are, like I said, bigger and stronger than the mediums. For reel size, I use a 4000 series reel. So again, that's even bigger than the 2500 or the 3000 series. Typically, I load these up with like 12-pound test line or 15-pound test line. So I'm going after some bigger fish. So I use these rods for my bigger saltwater fish. So I'll use them on the reefs. I'll catch small grouper on these rods. We've caught snapper, sheep's head, Florida sheep's head. I've also caught freshwater sheep's head, the freshwater drum on these rods. But definitely your bigger fish. Medium heavies are great for bass fishing, for going after your largemouth bass. But I wouldn't use these fish for like your panfish. So your trout, your crappie, your bluegill, that kind of thing. It's just too heavy a rod. If you're doing a lot of saltwater angling, so if you're doing a lot of snook, a lot of redfish, a lot of sea trout, I'd use a medium, but big flounder. If you're going after some of the bigger, bigger snapper, Spanish mackerel, I use medium heavy for Spanish mackerel, and even small kingfish, small cobia. I do a lot of fishing with what I would consider light gear for the species I'm going after. So if you're doing a lot of saltwater fishing, you may want to consider a medium heavy over a medium action rod. For most of your pond fishing and that kind of thing, I think a medium is the way to go. But if you're bass fishing and you're fishing heavier cover, or you're going after those really big fish, a medium heavy is something I would recommend. If you fish for pike or muskie, you're going to want even bigger, most likely. But if you're fishing for the smaller muskie and pike, medium heavy rods are a great way to go. I do a lot of trolling for pike when I'm up in Minnesota, and I troll with medium heavy rods, just like this one for pike. And then I do a lot of reef fishing. So in Tampa Bay, there's a lot of rubble, old bridges and things like that. And so a lot of fish like snapper, grouper, sheep's head, a lot of fish, even what we call grunts, which are delicious eating fish, congregate on those reefs, and I use medium heavy rods when I'm reef fishing. So that is basically an overview of what I would consider light tackle spinning rods. Now there are other types of fishing gear. There's a little, what we called push button reels when I was a kid, which are spin casters, like the Zebcos. Those are great for kids. I'm going to do a video on a Zebco rod. That's what my boys started out with. I love Zebco. I love their story. They actually made bombs in World War II. It was the Zero Bomb Company, which became Zebco. So I mean, it's a good switch from going from bombs to fishing gear. That's a good switch, wartime to peacetime deal. We're going to cover those in a future video, and then we're also going to talk about conventional gear, like your big conventional reels for catching big grouper and bigger saltwater fish and stuff like that. And we're going to talk about the type of gear that you would need to fish, to do surf fishing, like fishing from beaches or piers or that kind of thing. This stuff is not suited for that. So really, this video is all about what you would use fishing from the bank on a pond or a lake or a stream, or fishing from a small boat in a bay or an estuary, or on a lake or on a river, those kind of things, both fresh and saltwater. Now, I'm going to do a future video on how I maintain my rods for saltwater, but I'll just say that here. If you use fishing rods and reels for saltwater, especially if your fishing rod or reel is on the less expensive side, they're probably not made to really hold up to that salt exposure. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to wipe down those rods. You're going to want to clean them, and you're going to want to use like an oil. I use Cleanse Oil Marine, and I spray down my rods and reels and that kind of thing. But you want to make sure that nothing rusts or corrodes or that kind of thing. So we're going to go over that in a future video. But basically, this is the different sizes of rods. So when it stops raining, I'm going to take them outside. I'm going to line them all up, and I'm going to show you all of them in order, the ultralight to the light to the medium heavy, so that you can see all the different sizes, the different size rods, different size reels. And hopefully you can go choose the right rod for you. If you have any questions, if you're not sure what you're going to target, you can send me a message and let me know, hey, I'm in Missouri and I'm going to fish a lake. What should I get? I can help you. Or, hey, I'm in Florida, or I'm going to travel to Florida. I want to fish off the beach. What should I get? I can definitely help you select something for you that's in your budget. So with that, thanks for watching. I know this is probably a longer video, but hopefully it's good information for you. And like I said, we're going to go over a whole lot more. So hit that subscribe button and follow along with us on this Learn to Fish series. And send me your success stories. Like if you catch your first fish, you can email that stuff to me. Email me the photo, like where you were and that kind of thing. Email me at info@kempoutside.com. We'll throw you up on our Facebook page or on our Instagram and give you a shout out and a congratulations on your first fish. My son's first fish was a little spotted tilapia, and it was like that big, and it's like one of my favorite fishing photos of all time because it was his first fish. My 11-year-old, I took him out, and his first fish when he was 6 years old was a bonnethead shark. So like, how do you compete with that? His first fish is a shark. But anyway, it was cool. So, but with that, subscribe, follow along, and let me know how things are going. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. And any of you experienced anglers, if you have any tips or tricks that you want to share with fellow outsiders, drop those in the comments as well. We'll see you next time on Kemp Outside. Okay, so for the last part of our video, here we are outside, dodging raindrops, but that's okay. So here are the four rods side by side. So on the left is the medium heavy with the 4000 series rod or reel. The second from the left is the medium with the 2500 series reel. The rod that's second from the right is a light action with a 2000 size reel. And then the far right is the ultralight with a 500 size reel. So I'll go ahead and just pan up so you can see the difference in thickness, and then you can also see the difference in length. So right there, the 5-footer ends, then the 5.5-footer, and then the medium heavy and mediums are both 7 feet long. So you can see the difference. I'm going to kind of zoom in here, and so you can see the difference in thickness and reel sizes. So that's the ultralight, the light, the medium, and the medium heavy. All right, guys, I hope that helps. Any questions, send them to me in the comments, and we'll see you next time on Kemp Outside.